Have you ever wondered where the world of Harry Potter came from? When the books came out, the wizarding world felt like it had sprung into the world fully formed, a huge, complete universe of witches and wizards. The books had no precedent, no obvious precursor. It felt like J.K. Rowling had an endless reservoir of creativity to draw from, and it all seemed new. For a while, J.K. Rowling had the aura of Willy Wonka, a maestro who could only conjure greater works. Each new book was released with unmatched anticipation. There was a sense that every new book could give you a moment of pure childish wonder, a new sense of enchantment. But then the last book came out, time passed, there was a Harry Potter play and a series of movies about Newt Scamander, and then J.K. Rowling took up writing murder mysteries under pseudonyms and became embroiled in a controversy for her views on trans people. But then recently, while doing background research on the Disney movie The Sword and the Stone, I ran into Harry Potter. It was completely by accident. I hadn't heard or read anything about it ahead of time. There's a scene early on in T.H. White's The Once and Future King, where a sad young orphan with a big, loud foster father and foster brother comes to a wizard's cottage in the woods. Inside the cottage is an owl and a stuffed phoenix. The wizard tells the orphan that he's been expected and that the wizard will now be the orphan's magical tutor. The orphan is overjoyed as his life will now be filled with magic and purpose, where he had just been a lonely orphan before. Everything about this scene was so close to the beginning of Harry Potter that I sat back from the book and considered. It seemed impossible that you could have a book with all these elements again just by coincidence. I had read The Once and Future King ages ago, sometime in high school, and I had loved it, but I didn't remember much, just that Mordred was evil and Arthur got turned into a lot of really great animals. But now, rereading it, the similarity to Harry Potter seemed unmistakable. I had a crazy thought. What if Harry Potter was based on The Once and Future King? The parallel to Arthur and Merlin was way too close for it not to be. What sprang to mind immediately was Harry pulling the sword out of the sorting hat at the end of the Chamber of Secrets to kill the basilisk. It had always felt a bit Sword in the Stone-ish. But what else in Harry Potter could have been based on The Once and Future King? Was the Goblet of Fire the Holy Grail? And did that make Voldemort Mordred? At the same time, I was also doing background research on T.H. White, and found that he had done a translation of a 12th century bestiary titled The Book of Beasts. Surely this couldn't be the basis for fantastic beasts and where to find them. It seemed far too much of a coincidence for me that T.H. White should also have written an analogue to this book as well, and it expanded the question of whether the inspiration for Harry Potter came from The Once and Future King, to whether it came from T.H. White in general. It seemed to me that if the author drew inspiration from two works, it was possible she had used others. Driven now by ridiculous curiosity, I tracked down copies of a lot of old, largely out-of-print T.H. White books from local libraries. I really didn't think I'd find anything, but I kept finding more and more pieces from the Harry Potter world. So now I'm going to take you on a tour of these books, which I think were the foundation for the world of Harry Potter. And just a note to those for whom Harry Potter is a cherished part of your childhood. I get it, it's not any fun to listen to someone tear apart the workings of your favorite books. I was free of any great attachment to the Harry Potter universe, being too old when they came out for them to take much hold on me. Still, it's fine to just stop listening here. I get it. For everyone else, I'll continue on. To begin, I'll start not with The Once and Future King, but with the novel The Sword and the Stone from 1938. White published the first three books of The Once and Future King separately quite a bit earlier, The Sword and the Stone in 1938, The Witch in the Wood in 1939, and The Ill-Made Knight in 1941. He didn't bring them together into The Once and Future King, together with the fourth and final book, The Candle in the Wind, until 1958. He also took the extremely uncommon step of rewriting significant portions of the first two books for the compilation. This came up when I was researching the Disney movie of The Sword and the Stone. As it turned out, Disney had the rights for the original publication and not for the rewritten one in The Once and Future King. I had to track down an original copy if I wanted to do an apples-to-apples comparison for a book versus movie. Thankfully, US copies of the book are not quite as rare, Amazingly, there are scenes in the US copies that are completely different from the UK copies, as White rewrote sections of the US version after the British publication. It is the only book I know of that exists in 3 separate, distinct versions under the exact same title. It was also this 1938 copy of The Sword and the Stone that had some of the clearest parallels to the Harry Potter books. What had been hazy and indistinct in The Once and Future King became much clearer when reading the earlier form of the book. T.H. White's Arthurian saga was written as a tribute to Thomas Malory's Morte d'Arthur. Arthur's childhood was a few spare pages in Malory, but White envisioned an entire book of youthful adventures for the young Arthur in The Sword and the Stone. This creates a dramatic effect where you can witness the chaos and disillusionment of their adult lives, and immediately contrast it with the boyhood and youthful optimism of their childhood. The Sword and the Stone begins with Arthur out chasing after an escaped hawk, when he stumbles into Merlin's cottage. Here he meets Merlin the wizard and his delightful owl Archimedes. Merlin's cottage is full of natural specimens, both living and deceased, including a phoenix. Here Merlin tells Arthur that he will be the boy's tutor. And here we have the core of the similarity. An orphan who thought he was nothing special in the world is suddenly given a life full of magic and excitement, where he is special and worthy of a wizard's tutelage. Add to that the fact that this orphan boy was brought to the castle by Merlin himself as a baby, to be raised in obscurity for fear of anyone knowing his exalted origins. Which is exactly what Dumbledore did with Harry Potter. This is basically the opening for Harry Potter. The setup is the same. The only real difference is that Arthur already lives in a fantastic castle on the edge of a huge wild forest. The only addition was a wizard tutor. Where it gets more interesting is in the sections that were cut out or rewritten in The Once and Future King. T.H. White had a 5th book that he wanted to put in The Once and Future King, the Book of Merlin, but the publishers refused as it didn't fit with the story and was a bit preachy. In answer, White took the bits he most wanted to retain and edited them into The Once and Future King, cutting out certain bits that had been there previously. Madame Mim was cut entirely, and unlike in the Disney film where she appears as an old lady, in White is a beautiful raven-haired witch who captures Kay and Arthur and intends to eat them both. It is explained that Mim was a second-rate graduate of the College of Witches and Warlocks, Dom Daniel at the bottom of the sea. Merlin arrives just in time and saves them by engaging in a wizard's duel with Mim. The book explains that there was a lot of animosity between the white and the black creeds of magic, and that the differences of opinion were settled by official wizard duels. The duel begins with them bowing to each other, and then they could turn themselves into various kinds of animals. The Disney scene of this battle is actually pretty close to the book, with the winning shot being Merlin turning into a disease. So here we have a school for witches and wizards mentioned in the same paragraph as wizards' duels, which seems awfully close to Harry Potter. One of the other things that was rewritten for The Once and Future King was what animals Arthur was turned into for his lessons. In The Once and Future King, Arthur was transformed into a fish, a falcon, an ant, a goose, and a badger. However, in the earlier book, Arthur was transformed into a fish, a falcon, a snake, an owl, and a badger. If you've ever wondered why a badger was one of the houses of Hogwarts, as I certainly had, this felt like it explained quite nicely. Especially interesting for the sake of Harry Potter was the section where Arthur was turned into a snake. He meets another grass snake who boasts of his distant cousins the dinosaurs and the dragons. He mentions the Burmese python as well. There's also a charming description of snake speech. The speech of snakes was described as being beyond the range of human hearing, it being in, quote, these profound melodious accents that the snake conversed. It was honestly astounding to find an entire paragraph in White devoted to snake speech, which felt like the obvious inspiration behind Parseltongue. Another scene that was cut out of the earlier book had Arthur and Merlin visiting the castle of the giant Galapus to liberate the giant's captives. On the visit, Merlin turns the two of them invisible, which is described as very inconvenient, and they have to keep in contact to keep it going. There's a long scene with the two of them sneaking around a castle invisibly, which of course sounds like Harry's invisibility cloak, used constantly in his books. Just before that scene, Kay had been playing chess badly against himself. This brings up another point. In the Disney movie, Kay is much older than Arthur and mean. In the books, though, Kay is Arthur's best friend and foster brother. They were brought up together and they do everything together. And I think Kay was the basis for Ron Weasley. Arthur is jealous of Kay's legitimate parentage, and when Kay is jealous of Merlin's exclusive tutoring of Arthur, Arthur asks Merlin for an adventure for Kay. Merlin obliges and sends the two into the Forest Sauvage to meet Robin Hood, rescue some captives, and slay some monsters. The Forest Sauvage, I believe, stands in for the Forbidden Forest. And Little John is described as a Cockney-accented giant who sounds a bit like Hagrid. The same scene that has Kay playing chess also has a Reverend Sidebottom. I have to wonder if Neville Longbottom's name was related. At the end of The Sword in the Stone, Arthur goes looking for a sword for Kay to use in the tournament after forgetting Kay's at the inn. It's also worth mentioning that this description of the jousting tournament bears a lot of resemblance to the Quidditch pitch in Harry Potter, with wooden stands around the pitch and colorful pennants flying. Even the rings on a Quidditch pitch resemble jousting targets. So Arthur is looking for a sword and sees a sword stuck in a stone, pulls it out, not knowing that the sword was magic and could only be pulled by the man who would be King of England. The book ends with a surprised Arthur declared king. In the Harry Potter books, Harry pulls a sword out of the sorting hat and uses it to slay the basilisk at the end of Chamber of Secrets. And so I reached the end of The Sword in the Stone. I think J.K. Rowling had a copy of the original 1938 Sword in the Stone and referenced it profusely in the creation of Harry Potter. And I would have thought that would be the end of T.H. White's influence on Harry Potter, except that I had found that White had also published a translation of a 12th century bestiary called A Book of Beasts. This was far too interesting to pass up, given the trove of references I'd already found, so I got a copy of the book. The original 12th century text was intended as a guide to all the animals known at the time, so it mostly just lists animals everyone is quite familiar with. Also, White not only translates, but delightfully footnotes the text. I heartily recommend finding a copy for anyone who's curious. The book contains mostly well-known animals, but with the occasional basilisk and unicorn thrown in as well. White is adamant that all of these fantastic entries were originally attempts to describe real animals. The basilisk the cobra, and the unicorn the rhinoceros, which makes perfect sense when you stop to think about it, but takes all the fun away. I think this book was the concept for Harry Potter's Book of Beasts and Where to Find Them, but in this case it represents only the fantastic elements, the dragons and the phoenixes and the griffins. One specific thing from the book which did catch my eye was a description in a footnote of a mandrake root screaming, which came up in Harry Potter's herbology class. At this point, I had 3 T.H. White books that had seemed to have influenced Harry Potter. The next logical step was to see if there were more. So I Hermione Grangered this thing. At one point, I remember I was at the library and I pulled an entire row of books down to take back to the table. I ended up reading a lot of T.H. White books back to back in a glorious month spent with one of the great writers of the last century. In addition to finding out that I really liked T.H. White's writing, I found 4 more books that seemed to heavily influence the Harry Potter series. They were Mistress Mashams' Repose, The Maharaja and Other Stories, The Master, and finally, The Goshawk. I started putting together an episode about T.H. White's influence on Harry Potter, and that would have been the extent of it, except for a chance run-in with a copy of Bruce Coville's book, Jeremy Thatcher, Dragon Hatcher, while I was preparing the episode. This one slim book, hazily recalled from my own childhood, about a boy who acquires a dragon's egg in a magic store, made me consider the possibility that if Rowling was willing to use bits from one author, wouldn't she also be likely willing to use bits from other authors as well? It felt obvious in retrospect, but I wondered whether it would be possible to find other sources of the Harry Potter books. The search radius was huge. It now included all of children's literature written before 1995. But I went forward by making the following assumption, that everything in Harry Potter is taken from somewhere else. I started by searching the internet for anything anyone else had found, which yielded a nice list on Wikipedia. This got me going with titles like Groosham Grange, Wizard's Hall, and The Worst Witch. Pure luck helped again after I checked out The Worst Witch from the library, and the library website suggested The Little Witch. Checking this out led in turn to a suggestion for The Witch Family, which gave me the belated idea to search for kids' books with the word witch in the title. This was so stupidly effective, I kind of wonder if it's how Rowling herself found all of these books originally. All I had to do was keep digging, and I kept finding more and more of the origins of Harry Potter. I also realized that when you take the books apart, the biggest element is just a bunch of kids at a British boarding school. This led me down a thankfully short list of books about kids in boarding schools. There were really only a few contenders: the Mallory Towers series, the Jennings series, Tom Brown's School Days, and the Greyfriars series. And I think all of them were used to some extent, but none more so than the Greyfriars series by Frank Richards. So now I'm going to walk through Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, scene by scene, showing what I think were the original sources for each scene. A few ground rules. I had incredibly high standards for what I'm including here today. Generally, the only books I'm including have multiple clear connections to Harry Potter. Still, with quite a few books, I couldn't see an obvious connection, and I'm leaving them aside. So, just having a magic school wasn't good enough, or a kid who could do magic. Also, a bit of a disclaimer, this is all guesswork. I have no proof that any of this is more than just conjecture. J.K. Rowling is the author of the Harry Potter series, and it will likely never be known exactly what inspired her. I am just taking a very long, educated guess. Starting at the beginning, Chapter 1, with the young Harry Potter being dropped off at the Dursleys by Dumbledore. This comes straight out of The Sword and the Stone and Arthurian legend, with Merlin taking the baby Arthur to live in anonymity with Sir Hector. T.H. White used this as the premise for the first book of his Arthurian saga, The Sword and the Stone, from 1939. Merlin then comes back when Arthur had grown in order to tutor Arthur and prepare him for his great destiny as King Arthur. Here, Harry is stepping in for a young Arthur, and Dumbledore is stepping in for Merlin. Then we go to Harry's youth in the house with the Dursleys, and for reference we're going to The Secret of Platform 13 by Eva Ibbotson, published in 1994. A book that basically asks the question, what if Hagrid went to retrieve Harry but didn't know which kid Harry was, and assumed it was Dudley? The Secret of Platform 13 is a book about a young prince from a magical kingdom who was kidnapped as a baby during the time every 9 years when a connection opens between their kingdom and the real world. This opening happens at an abandoned platform of King's Cross Station on the mysterious Platform 13. 9 years after he was taken, the portal opens again and a crew assembles to perform a rescue. In the meantime, the boy's kidnappers, a rich, annoying couple named the Trottles, have had their own child named Raymond. Raymond grows up fat, annoying, and very spoiled. The kidnapped child, named Ben, is relegated to the kitchens as a servant. Ben sleeps in a windowless cupboard and works in the house for his keep. Ben is kind and helpful and befriends all the magical people who have come to take Raymond back home. We first meet Raymond screaming, having a temper tantrum in the morning because he doesn't want to go to school. Mrs. Trottle replies to his screams, "What is it, my angel, my babykins, my treasure? Tell Mama, tell your mummy, my pinky boo." Raymond insists he's too sick for school, but he wants to be taken out for lunch and shopping to buy more new toys. So he and his mother go out for lunch, followed surreptitiously by the magical beings. They are disturbed to see the boy they think is their prince being terrible in the restaurant and tantruming about everything. Finally, when the boy orders a Knickerbocker Glory and complains that it doesn't have an umbrella in it, one of the magical group gets frustrated and performs a tiny spell that flips the whole sundae over onto the table. Now, for me, the key word here is Knickerbocker Glory. When I first read about Dudley ordering a Knickerbocker Glory in Harry Potter, I had no idea what it was, and I had to look it up because we don't have them in America. So when I saw it again here in Platform 13, it seemed pretty clear to me that this was the predecessor for Dudley. Dudley is almost exactly like Raymond, and the way that Mrs. Dursley talks to Duddums is very close to how Mrs. Tuttle talks to Raymond. And really, everything about Harry matches Ben here, right down to living in a cupboard and having to earn his keep in the house. His personality is also very close to how we find Harry at the beginning. Kind, self-effacing, and helpful. I even think the tiny burst of magic that flips the sundae over is similar to a plot point where Harry makes the glass disappear in the zoo exhibit. Also, you know who else visited the snake house on their birthday? Mary Poppins. When her birthday falls on the full moon, she goes to the zoo and all the animals are out of their cages to celebrate her birthday. She goes to the snake house and is greeted by the Lord of the Jungle, the King Cobra. Notably, inside the cages are humans, anyone who was still in the zoo after closing. The snake greets Mary Poppins as a distant cousin, and all the snakes have gathered to give her their regards for her birthday. On to Chapter 3 and the Letter from Hogwarts. Here we're moving on to Groosham Grange by Anthony Horowitz, published in 1988. Groosham Grange has a somewhat similar premise to Harry Potter, where a kid gets a sudden invitation to a mysterious school, goes there on a train where he meets a boy and a girl who become his friends, and then learns it's actually a magic school and that he's a wizard. Unlike Harry Potter, though, not much happens in the book Groosham Grange. It is extremely short. I don't think it took me much over an hour to read, and confusingly, the boy isn't told he's magic or that the school is magic until the very end of the book, when he's already been there for a while. The book is such a blank template that I actually wondered if this was the original blank that Harry Potter was based on, like a dressmaker's dummy. At any rate, the Groosham letter magically arrives in the mail just as the main character has been kicked out of his last school. David's comically ridiculous parents are glad to be rid of him and bundle him out the door right away. Instead of an owl, there's a huge raven watching him from his lawn as he leaves. Then in Chapter 4, the Dursleys go to great lengths to keep Harry from getting his letter. I think this harkens back to Platform 13 again. The big reveal at the end of the book is a letter that explains that Ben had always been the real kidnapped boy all along. It took the entire book for him to get this letter, though. As for Harry finding out he's a wizard on his 11th birthday, I think that's a nod to Susan Cooper's The Dark is Rising series, where Will Stanton gets his powers and finds out he's an immortal tasked with the defense of the light on his 11th birthday. Similarly, at Groosham Grange, the kids get their magical inductions on their 13th birthday. And on we go to Diagon Alley, the realm of Bruce Coville and especially the book Jeremy Thatcher, Dragon Hatcher, published in 1991. In Jeremy Thatcher, a young boy finds his way into Mr. Elives's magic shop, where he finds what turns out to be a dragon's egg. Jeremy is enchanted by the egg and asks how much it is. The old proprietor tells the boy he doesn't want it, but then changes his mind and tells Jeremy, "It wants you." Contrast this to one of the most famous lines in the first Harry Potter book, from Harry getting his wand at Ollivander's, and Ollivander explaining to Harry, "The wand chooses the wizard." It's not even the only line that's similar from Mr. Elives's magic shop. Harry ends up staring uncomfortably into Ollivander's eyes, unable to break the look, in a line that is also very close to Coville's. Quote, "After a few seconds, Jeremy wanted to break the stare down. To his horror, his eyes seemed locked in place. No matter how he struggled, he couldn't look away." Compare this to Harry Potter's. Mr. Ollivander moved closer to Harry. Harry wished he would blink. Those silver eyes were a bit creepy. I'll come back to Jeremy Thatcher again later in the topic of hatching a dragon's egg. Harry gets his textbooks, including two that seem to reference works by T.H. White. There's the Standard Book of Spells by Miranda Goshawk, and Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. Harry also acquires his owl, Hedwig, as a familiar. Hedwig is very, very similar to the owl Archimedes from The Sword and the Stone, even nibbling Harry's ear lightly, exactly like Archimedes does when Arthur first meets Merlin in Merlin's cottage. From here we move on to Platform 9 3/4 and Harry's move into the wizarding world. The magic portal at King's Cross Station is preceded, somewhat obviously, by the book The Secret of Platform 13, in which the secret is the magical portal that opens at Platform 13 at King's Cross Station. Harry gets on the train, helped by the large and charming Weasley family. The structure of the Weasleys has a lot of parallels with Will Stanton's family in Susan Cooper's The Dark is Rising from 1973. Will has a bunch of older brothers, including one who is off seeing exotic places with the Navy, another who is in college, and a pair of obnoxious twins. Will also has one sister, similar to Ginny. But once we're on the train to Hogwarts, we make the transition that I find fascinating. I'm going to preface this introduction with a question. What year is it at Hogwarts? Hogwarts seems to exist apart from the modern world. There are no airplanes, no telephones, no pens. People write with quill and ink. I would go so far as to say that a lot of the appeal of the world is its old-fashioned charm. The most interesting source I found for Harry Potter was from Frank Richards's Greyfriars Series, published in the weekly periodical The Magnet every week from 1908 until 1940. As soon as we get on the train to Hogwarts, we have entered Magnet number 1 and have traveled back in time to the year 1908. Harry Wharton gets on the train to go to Greyfriars. Harry Potter is now firmly in the story of Harry Wharton and friends at the school Greyfriars. The original Harry didn't want to be sent off to school, and in a fantastic difference to Harry Potter, gets into a roaring fight with the only other schoolboy on the train, Ted Nugent. Of course, they end up becoming friends, and Harry saves Nugent's life later in the same story. Then we see Inside Hogwarts, whose interior is very similar to Wizard's Hall by Jane Yolen from 1991. In Wizard's Hall, a young, tone-deaf wizard enters a wizard school. He is special, as he is the 113th student, and prophecy has said that the school will be saved from attack from a dark wizard as long as it has 113 students. The first thing young Thornmallow sees when he enters the wizard school is a line of gold-framed wizard portraits, and when he starts talking to one of them, the woman in the portrait talks back, eventually popping out of the picture and leading him to his room. On the bedstand there is a magical moving picture of Thornmallow's mother. I think the concept of owls delivering the mail comes from the book The Witch Family, published in 1960. This is a darling little book about a young witch, an older witch, and a baby witch. In this book, it describes the witch's mail is delivered by cardinals. The book is set in Baltimore, where the little girl sees the bright red birds flying around. I think Hogwarts also owes a lot to the description from T.H. White's Mistress, Mashams, Repose from 1946. This is the story of a 10-year-old orphan girl named Maria, who is the sole surviving heir of a huge but crumbling estate called Malplaquet. She has 2 cruel overseers who are plotting to steal her inheritance and the estate. Then one day, Maria is exploring a small island on the estate and discovers a hidden village of descendants of Lilliput, who had been brought back to England at the time of Gulliver's travels. Maria attempts to befriend the tiny people, and has to learn that one cannot befriend someone if they are compelled by overwhelming power. The Lilliputians are put in danger when Maria's guardians, Miss Brown and the Vicar, learn of the Lilliputians' existence and plot to capitalize on their discovery. Maria is assisted in saving them by the Professor, a poor old academic who lives in a Gameskeeper's cottage at the edge of the estate. Many hijinks ensue in the mansion of Malplaquet. Before the evil pair are arrested, the deed to Maria's home is found, and the secret of the Lilliputians is secured. It is an excellent children's book. What I find similar to Harry Potter wasn't the plot, but the settings and characters. Malplaquet sounded like the interior of Hogwarts, and the Gameskeeper's cottage was, well, the Gameskeeper's cottage. Malplaquet is described as a once grand but now crumbling mansion filled with hundreds of rooms, stairways, corridors, paintings, and many old distinguished ghosts. The mansion of Malplaquet was based on the school at Stowe, where White himself had been a teacher for several years. Stowe was a grand old mansion that had fallen into disrepair before being turned into a school. This, for me, evoked the interior of Hogwarts. The images of the grand old estate full of crazy forgotten rooms, stairways leading to other stairways, old paintings, and ghosts roaming about. The Gameskeeper's cottage was based on the one at the edge of Stowe, where White himself took up residence after deciding to write full-time. So the character of the Professor is just White describing himself in his own cottage. White's cottage also shows up as Merlin's cottage in The Sword and the Stone. White enjoyed writing himself into his books, and the Professor was clearly just White working on his translation for the Book of Beasts. The Gameskeeper's cottage was also where Maria went when she needed help or advice. The Professor was her friend, and he assisted her with the Lilliputians. So this idea of young characters going down to the Gameskeeper's cottage for help can be traced right to Masham. But the thing that really stuck with me from this book was a character named Dumbledum. His name comes up 28 times in a book where most people, other than Maria, are mentioned only by title. He's a minor character, a local policeman, but his name kept getting used loudly and profusely in this book. Let's say it a few times for good measure. Dumbledum. 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 It sounds like Dumbledore's less intelligent, distant cousin. I'm actually kind of a fan of the original name now. Dumbledum. And yes, I think this is the origin for Dumbledore's name. Moving on to flying lessons, we're now going into the book The Worst Witch by Jill Murphy. If you caught The Worst Witch on Netflix and didn't know any better, it would be easy to think that it's far too similar to Harry Potter to have been permitted by the Harry Potter lawyers. But The Worst Witch was first published in 1974, nearly 20 years before Harry Potter was written. This book, more than any other, is pointed out as an obvious inspiration for Harry Potter. The main character in the book is named Mildred Hubble, and she attends Miss Cackle's Academy for Witches in an old castle on top of a hill. Here they study potions and how to ride their broomsticks and train their cats to ride their broomsticks with them. Mildred always seems to be in trouble, though she means well. She's not very good at being a witch and is often in danger of being expelled. The potions master at Cackle's is Miss Hardbroom, a severe woman who wears all black and has the skill of being just behind someone when they're talking about her. I have to wonder if she's the basis for Snape. Hardbroom is always nice to Ethel Hallow, Mildred's nemesis, but is personally irritated by Mildred. Ethel is like a combination of Draco Malfoy and Hermione Granger. She has Draco's mean streak and Hermione's annoying know-it-all attitude. In the first book of the series, The Worst Witch, the girls are preparing a synchronized broom-flying display for a Halloween celebration. Part of their display has the girls each dive down towards the ground, only to pull up at the last moment. This is almost exactly what is described the first time Harry Potter rides a broomstick. He is saving Neville's Remembrall from crashing into the ground, and dives down with it, only to catch it and pull up just before hitting the ground. The other broom-riding parallel is at the Halloween celebration itself, where a disgruntled Ethel has cursed Mildred's broom to buck wildly during the flying display. The description of the broom trying to throw Mildred off is extremely close to what happened during Harry Potter's first Quidditch match, the one where they thought Snape was cursing the broomstick. Speaking of Snape, the plotline where Harry and company suspect that Snape is working for Voldemort may have come from the Witch series by Phyllis Reynolds Naylor, first published in 1978. In this series, two young girls suspect their neighbor is a witch, but nobody believes them, and it is kept very ambiguous whether she actually is or not. The plot in Harry Potter where Harry and the rest think Snape is the bad guy seems similar. Naylor's books also have the names Marjorie Beasley for the best friend, and Mrs. Tuggle for the witch. I think it's possible these became respectively Weasley and Muggle in the world of Harry Potter. About Harry's natural talent at Quidditch, I think this is a callback to Harry Wharton from the Magnet number 10. In this one, Harry is revealed to be a superb cricketer, and ends up as the captain of his form's team. Unlike Harry Potter, though, Wharton got there with assiduous practice, however. Carrying on to the Mirror of Erised, I'm going to first another Bruce Coville book, Jennifer Murdley's Toad, from 1992. Jennifer Murdley's Toad is the sequel to Jeremy Thatcher Dragon Hatcher. Here, an evil sorceress is trying to get Jennifer to hand over a magic toad who has the Stone of Perfect Happiness in its head. The sorceress shows Jennifer in a mirror what she could look like if she were to just hand over the toad. Jennifer, who is very plain, sees herself as beautiful in the mirror. She considers taking the witch's offer and just giving the toad over, before remembering herself, and she fights back against the witch and saves the toad. This also gets us to the Sorcerer's Stone itself. The all-magical nature of the Sorcerer's Stone, I think, came from the Stone of Perfect Happiness from Jennifer Murdley's Toad. And I think the plot for the theft of the stone originates from the Magnet number 9, the Nabob's Diamond. In the Nabob's Diamond, Harry Wharton has an extremely valuable diamond that has been given to him by his friend Hurry Ramsat Jam Singh. They happen to know that a gypsy is intent on stealing the diamond, and so it is put into a safe in the headmaster's office. Harry Wharton thinks the thief intends to break into the school through a secret underground passageway that connects a storeroom in the school to a distant ruined chapel. The exit from this secret passage comes out on the 3rd floor of the school. Just like it at Hogwarts, students are forbidden from going to the 3rd floor of the old wing, but here the doorway is closed off because the 3rd floor of the old wing is crumbling. This secret passageway will come up again in The Prisoner of Azkaban. The boys apprehend and capture the gypsy as he comes out of the passage, and prevent him from stealing the gem. Then we go to Hagrid hatching a dragon's egg in his cottage. This felt very much like the main plot for Jeremy Thatcher Dragon Hatcher. In the book, after Jeremy acquires the egg in the magic shop, he takes it home and is given specific instructions on how to get the egg to hatch. Once it does, he has to deal with a very quickly growing dragon that soon is too big to fit in his room. The plot for Harry Potter is very similar, with Hagrid acquiring the egg and hatching it in his cottage. Hagrid ends up sending the young dragon off to live with the wild dragons when it gets too big for him to handle, which is again exactly what happens at the end of Jeremy Thatcher. There he sends the dragon back to its home through a magic portal in the magic shop, after a touching and tearful goodbye. This is not before Jeremy Thatcher has had a chance to ride his magnificent dragon through the night, however. The description of the baby dragon also owes something to T.H. White's book The Goshawk, which was White's own description of his first attempt to raise and train the notoriously difficult bird, the goshawk. When White first receives the bird, it is young, still a fledgling. Hagrid's dragon is a wild beast, much closer to the young goshawk White talks about than to Jeremy's dragon. Then we get to the Forbidden Forest, where Voldemort is sucking the blood of a dead unicorn. For the reference to a dead and mangled unicorn, we go to T.H. White's sequel to The Sword and the Stone, The Witch in the Wood from 1940. The most striking scene in the whole book involves 4 young Orkney boys setting out to capture a unicorn after hearing that their mother had taken a fancy to obtaining one. They manage to attract one using a kitchen girl and proceed to kill it violently. Then, realizing they can't bring it home on their own, they hack off the head for a trophy, which they then drag back to their home to show their mother, who doesn't even notice. The scene is graphic and terrible, contrasting the beauty and purity of the unicorn with the savagery of their slaughter, and standing as a preview for what they will later do to Arthur. It also seems like the likely influence for the scene in Harry Potter, as dead unicorns are hard to come by in the world of literature. When the centaurs leap in to save Harry, they were leaping straight out of C.S. Lewis's Narnia books, first published in 1950. Here, too, these centaurs are terse fellows who talk a lot about astrology. Also, about Malfoy, I think Malfoy is a take on Mordred. Arthur's son Mordred, born of Arthur's half-sister Morgase, is white-haired, blue-eyed, cunning, and spiteful, just like the young Malfoy. We then go to a scene where Harry, Ron, and Hermione decide to steal the Sorcerer's Stone before Voldemort can get to it. I think the series of trials they go through here is taken from the book The Neverending Story, published in 1979. There, the character Atreyu has to go through 3 gates: the Sphinx Gate, the Magic Mirror Gate, and the No-Key Gate. For Harry Potter, these are reconfigured and added to, so the No-Key Gate becomes a literal gate where the key has to be found amidst other keys, and the Sphinx Gate becomes a riddle, a logic puzzle with potions for Hermione. But the description of the magic mirror in Harry Potter is very, very close to the description of the No-Key Gate in the Neverending Story. Here it says, "But if someone succeeds in forgetting all purpose, in wanting nothing at all, to him the gate will open of its own accord." Compare this to how Dumbledore describes how Harry got the Sorcerer's Stone from the magic mirror. Quote, "It was one of my more brilliant ideas, and between you and me that's saying something. You see, only one who wanted to find the stone, find, but not use it, would be able to get it. I find this conceptually the same as the one in the Neverending Story. The only way to get through the gate is to not want to. If Dumbledore thinks himself clever for thinking of it, well, he wasn't the first." About the Man with Two Faces, Professor Quirrell, I think this comes from T.H. White's The Once and Future King from 1958, which finished off the Arthurian story. Mordred has a scene in this book where it is described how he went mad after being left alone with his mother Morgase for 20 years. It says, "He, while his brothers fled to England, was the one who stayed alone with her for 20 years, her living larder. Now that she was dead, he had become her grave. She existed in him like the vampire. When he moved, when he blew his nose, he did it with her movement." In Harry Potter, Professor Quirrell seems like an absolutely literal take on this idea, which had been meant as a metaphor. But Quirrell had an actual vampire living in the back of his head, drinking unicorn blood. When we get to the scene where Professor Quirrell is burned trying to grab Harry, I think the inspiration comes from a very unexpected source. Nobody reads L. Frank Baum's original Wizard of Oz books anymore, but I think this is where you find the source for Harry's magical protection from evil, as well as for the mark on his forehead. When Dorothy first lands in Oz, she meets the Good Witch of the North. In addition to giving Dorothy the slippers from the Wicked Witch who had been crushed under Dorothy's house, the Good Witch gives Dorothy a kiss on the forehead, which leaves a glowing circular mark, imbuing Dorothy with the protection of the Good Witch of the North. This mark is something everyone can see on Dorothy's forehead, and it shows that she is in the protection of the Good Witch. This protection is so powerful that neither the winged monkeys nor the Wicked Witch of the West will try to harm Dorothy directly. The worst the witch does is trip Dorothy to get her to lose a shoe, and Dorothy is so mad she throws a bucket of water on the witch, inadvertently melting her. I think Harry's lightning bolt is very much the twin of the glowing mark left by the Good Witch on Dorothy, and like Dorothy, he is imbued with the protection of a witch, his mother in this case, and this imbued power burns evildoers who try to harm him. People often ask how Dumbledore could have let Harry go off to confront Voldemort on his own, but that's almost exactly what the Wizard of Oz does with Dorothy. He sent her away with the directive to kill the Wicked Witch of the West, and his reasoning was that she had already killed the Wicked Witch of the East when her house fell on her, and that she was protected with the mark of the North Witch. Harry Potter carried nearly identical protection and a similar mark on his forehead. The only difference is that Dorothy was told flat out that she needed to go kill the witch. She didn't want to, but she set off for the Wicked Witch anyhow. Harry Potter wasn't told, but I think everyone just assumed he would somehow kill the wizard. Then Harry Potter wakes up in the infirmary, his first sight Dumbledore's gold-rimmed spectacles. This takes us back to the Magnet #1, where Harry Wharton wakes up in the infirmary after saving Frank Nugent from drowning, and the first thing he sees when he wakes up are the gold-rimmed spectacles of the headmaster, Dr. Locke. And so we reach the end of the Sorcerer's Stone. Once again, I don't have any proof whatsoever that the similarities I found are real. The nature of this project was necessarily filled with guesswork and conjecture. For me, the project was a massive literary treasure hunt. Reverse engineering the books and finding their sources was like finding the source of the Nile. From what I could tell, no one's tried to map out Mount Potter before. People would recognize one source, or maybe two, and wonder at the similarities. But because the sources were so scattered, nobody really got a good picture of how the whole thing fit together. Much like Voldemort's Horcruxes, the background of Harry Potter is not contained in just one book. And if you're just looking at one, you won't see the full scope of this. You have to look at all of them together, and then you can see the real picture that forms from the mosaic. I can't emphasize enough what a weird way that is to write a book. And it gets to a question that bothered me the whole time I was looking for these sources, which is why? Why compose a book this way? Supposing the book was composed from other stories, why do this? I think the answer is probably the most cynical one: for money. I think these books were designed, were formulated for mass consumption. They take only specific parts out of other books, leaving the rest behind like chaff. The massive worldwide success of Harry Potter certainly points out the effectiveness of this approach. Because this project took a long time, I had a lot of time to consider the ethics of this. All authors riff on existing ideas, but they don't usually build books up almost completely from elements of other people's books, as I think may have happened here. It's kind of Frankensteinian, but then everyone loves Frankenstein. The whole time I was researching this, I kept thinking of Gilderoy Lockhart in the Chamber of Secrets. Using somebody else's work and getting famous off of it was exactly what Gilderoy Lockhart did. He was a wildly successful author who stole works from other people and then erased their memories. I always felt Gilderoy was a strange character for a new author to write into a book, but given how I think the books were composed now, it seems more reasonable. I now wonder if Lockhart was just Rowling perhaps feeling guilty. It certainly looks like she did exactly this herself. It's interesting to see what some of these authors said when asked about the similarities between their work and Harry Potter. Jill Murphy, the author of the Worst Witch series, was mostly annoyed. She said, "It's irritating. Everyone asks the same question, and I even get children writing in to ask whether I mind about the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and pointing out similarities." Eva Ibbotson, the author of The Secret of Platform 13, had nothing but praise for Rowling, saying, "I'd like to shake her by the hand. I think we all borrow from each other as writers." At most, I found Jane Yolen, author of Wizard's Hall, who said, "I always tell people that if Miss Rowling would like to cut me a very large check, I would cash it." And the community of writers seems to keep quiet about most of this. Harry Potter was an incredible boon to children's book authors. It was the proverbial tide that lifted all boats. Any annoyance they felt seemed to be kept private, which makes sense. It would be bad publicity for them to speak out about Rowling. It would look like sour grapes, and would likely just make them look bad for saying anything. This project offered me the opportunity to read a lot of truly excellent books. I read nearly the whole catalog of T.H. White, and discovered in his writing some of the finest work of the 20th century. If you loved Harry Potter, and you want a chance to wander the halls and paths of Hogwarts again, read Mistress Mashams' Repose. If you want to see Harry Potter become an adult, you might like The Once and Future King. If you like Norbert or Buckbeak, read The Goshawk. But if you want to know what Rowling loved, and where she turned for inspiration, go read T.H. White. Also, I think Bruce Coville and Jill Murphy's work is amazing. If I could encourage people to do one thing, it would be to go read any of the books I've mentioned here. The best way to honor these writers is to read their work. Find their books in the library or in the bookstore, and enjoy. These are all excellent books. And so I will continue on, next up with Chamber of Secrets. Because it should probably be stated explicitly, it wasn't just the first book that pulls plot from everywhere. Every Harry Potter book was constructed like this, so there are a lot more sources out there. Alright. Thanks for listening today. This is Rose with Rose Colored Movies.